All right, the kids can be dismissed to Children's Church. Rest of you turn to James chapter 1. James chapter 1. We're going to be looking together at verse 13 through 18 of James 1. Let's read together. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does He tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like the shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all He created. We started 2 weeks ago. We started this series from the book of James. I wanted to do something practical. I love this book. This book, every time I read it, I'm like, wow, I just discover things here in this book. Temptation. I was thinking this week about, the focus of this, the practical nature of that. He starts off by saying, hey, I'm aware of where you are in the book. In the first chapter he says, I'm aware of where you are. I'm aware of what's happened to you, and I care. And then he says, guess what? I'm aware of what's going on in your life, that there are some trials going on. And you're not going to know how to handle the difficulties at times. Ask God, and He'll give you the wisdom to deal with it. And we skipped a part of this, but we'll come back to this later, because one of the things that James really deals with is how we think about the poor. And so we'll come back to that. He really deals with poor and rich quite a bit in the book. But the part that we're going to look at today is temptation. Now, think about this. They were in their comfort zone. They were in the land where they grew up. They came to Jesus. And because of that, their fellow countrymen, their fellow Jews, turned against them and persecuted them so severely that they left home. And they're in a foreign country now to them. It was all part of the Roman world, but they were in a foreign land where nobody knew them. And they're undergoing all these trials. And then he talks about temptation. Because, let's be honest, when we're somewhere where we don't think anybody knows us, it's a lot easier to get into things, correct? I mean, if I'm here in town, it's a lot. There's a good chance I'm going to run into somebody that knows me, right? If I'm in Northwest Arkansas, there's a good chance I'm going to run into somebody that knows me. James and I, as I've shared before, I've always done something special with each of the boys for their birthday. We do something. Mine and James has always been, we would go, at some point we'd drive to Springfield and we'd go to Bass Pro Shop. That was just something that we've done since he was really young. We went yesterday. Well, it's the beginning of spring break everywhere, I guess, because it was like that store was insane yesterday. And everywhere we went, it was just, people getting in my way. Y'all know what I'm feeling? It's like they have no right to be there.
You didn't get me anybody.
I didn't get in anybody's way. You're right. Because I had right of way. You know. And I was looking for something right there at the last, and James had told me he was going to go get something, and he took off. And so I'm over there, and this guy steps in front of me, and I'm like, oh, okay. And so I move down, and I wait for him to move, and I step up, and I was looking for a certain kind of rub for ribs is what I was looking for. And so I was going down through there and looking at various things, and so I see it, and I go, oh, there they are. And so I moved over to look at them, and this guy steps in front of me again. And I said to myself, I'm in Springfield, Missouri. Nobody knows me here. I went, dude, really? And he turns around and he looks at me like, is there a problem? And I went, yeah, you're the problem. And he went, what did I do? And I said, this is twice. And he goes, so? And I go, just thank God it's not the third strike. And he goes, what's that mean? And I said, let me step down and you find out. And he went, oh, is it that important? And I went, no, not really. I just thought I'd have to say something. You just feel like I could do that there because nobody's going to know me. It's Springfield, Missouri. Nobody's going to know me there. And it's amazing in the times that I have turned down an aisle at Bass Pro and run into somebody I knew, that there is no small world. It's like Debbie and I grew up in real similar backgrounds. That one of the things that we grew up facing, and I've shared this before, but it just fits here and it's funny, is that we grew up in a church culture that boys and girls could not swim together. I mean, mixed swimming was just it was something I've always say, Doug never faced this growing up in California. Because their church youth group went to the beach and there was no mention of boys and girls should not swim together. But the culture that we grew up in, it was like there was never mixed swimming. And so a funny story from my family is we used to dig potatoes every 4th of July. That was tater digging day unless it was raining. And after all the potatoes were dug and everything is done, we always went swimming. Went to the swimming hole, went swimming. My mother would take us. Well, one year my cousins were here, and I had 3 girl cousins that came down. And so they'd help dig taters, and it came time for us to leave to go swimming. And of course, us boys, we always had other friends that were going to come and go. And my mom looked at my cousins and said, y'all can't go. And they went, we've worked really hard. And my granny stepped out on the porch and said, I got work for you girls. Get in the house. And they had to go in the house and work, and us boys went swimming. And they couldn't understand it. And my granny was telling them the whole time, wow, you can't swim with a bunch of boys. That's not ladylike. Girls don't swim with boys. That just doesn't happen. And my cousins, they could not understand that. They were from Kansas City, and that was like, what's wrong with you people? Well, Deb grew up in the same kind of setting, and so where boys and girls couldn't swim together, and they would go on vacation, and they would always stay in motels that had indoor pools, and they'd go down and they'd go swimming. And Debbie one day made the connection. She went, it's not sinful if nobody knows you. That's right. So I think that, when you think about it, we think, okay, well, if I'm tempted, as long as nobody knows it, it's okay. If I'm in a foreign, it's the Las Vegas mentality. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. As long as nobody knows about it, it'll be all right. Here they are. They've been moved. They've been feeling like they're being punished. They feel like their whole world is falling apart. And so then they're being tempted to sin, is what he's talking about here. He's saying, you're being tempted to sin, and in reality, one of the things that it doesn't matter where we are, one of the things that the book of James is full of, and this is something that our culture has lost sight of, is personal responsibility. He says, when you're tempted, notice what he says. When you're tempted, guess what? It's going to happen. It's a fact. He's saying this to them. Here you are in this foreign country. Here you are, you've been ripped out of your home. So when you're tempted, the real temptation is going to become how you react to it. He says, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. God gets blamed for so much. A tornado can rip through, in the month of March, a tornado can rip through and tear a trailer park, because tornadoes hate trailer parks. Isn't it a fact? They always hit trailer parks. They hate them. I've seen on newscasts where they would jump from trailer park to trailer park. They would skip entire housing divisions because they hate trailers. And so they just go, and then they would interview the woman, and you all know the woman I'm talking about. She's always got curlers in her hair. She's got this old tattered house coat. And, you know, Channel 5 shows up and goes, "What did you think about that you just lost your trailer?" And I'm not making fun of people's losses. It's just that's the way it seems to go. And she says, "I just don't understand why God did this to us," right? Every time. And I'm going, really? Apparently God hates trailer parks too. So, boom, he just gets rid of them. So it's very easy when things go wrong, it's very easy to blame God. We go, why is God doing this to me? Okay, so the other thing that we want to do is, when we're tempted, we want to instantly go, why did God do it? Now think about the reasoning behind this. Here's what we do with it. We go, okay, if God had not allowed these things to be in my life, if God had not allowed, if I hadn't have, turned down that street, or if I hadn't have done this, or if I hadn't have, been doing this, if God had not allowed the other people to do all of these things, then I would not be tempted, right? And so we want to say, here, it's God's fault. God is tempting me. And so James turns it around and he says, okay, here you are as believers in God. He says, do not blame God for the temptations that's going on in your life, because God doesn't do evil. Because notice the next part there. Notice what he says. He says, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does He tempt anyone. It's so important for us to understand some of the things that he says to us here. Look at verse 16. He says, don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father in the heavenly lights, who does not change like the shifting shadows. I have a couple of game cameras out in the woods, and they stay out there year round. They're on. As I like to see. I like to see what goes on in the woods, Couple of, I guess it was last weekend, I pulled one of the cards out of the game camera and plugged it in, and they said there were 250-something pictures on there. I was like, oh, that's cool. Can't wait to see what's on there, The deer and the turkeys and the coyote, various things. And then there's just one whole section of pictures of nothing but empty, just woods. And I'm like, so I just kind of started going through those pictures, and I'm like, what set that camera off? And it was shadows. It's so sensitive that it picked up the shadow movement. Because what you'd see is the wind would be blowing, and it would move the trees, and the shadows, because it's cleared out in front of that camera, the shadows would move. And it would catch those, and it would take a picture. So, and the shadows would be, it was really kind of neat, because, 1 minute the tree's shadow was here, and then the wind blew and the tree's shadow's over here, because it shifted it in the way the sun was hitting it. And so that shadow's back and forth. And so it's sitting there taking pictures, and I go, well, I guess I needed to see the shifting shadows. Yes, I did for today. God is not like a shifting shadow. God doesn't look down and go, oh, today I love Chuck. Tomorrow, I'm going to dislike Chuck, and so I'm going to tempt Chuck to sin, so that when Chuck sins, then I can go, aha! Got ya. Exactly. Sadly, there's that sick thing that goes on in our minds. I do it, you do it, we all do it at times. We go, oh, that's the way God is, that God just changes His mind. Today God loves me, tomorrow God hates me. Right? That God doesn't look at His people that way. God is not like me and you, where we're fickle, right? People are fickle, correct? I mean, especially, we see this, I used to say we see it in kids, but man, it's more and more where we see it in adults, do we not? Where people are like, oh, the term BFF and all those, they just crack me up because they change as the shifting shadows. People are on again, off again. People are like, well, this day I like this. It's like look at how fashion changes. Everything changes. That people like something today and then they don't like it tomorrow, and all of those kind of things that we kind of tend to bring from our culture and from our mindset, and we apply it to God. And so they would be there, they've lost their homes, they're facing trials, so naturally when temptation comes in, they go, God must be bringing this into my life because He really wants to punish me. He wants to catch me doing something, and once He's caught me doing something, then boom, He has a reason to therefore do whatever it is He's going to do to me. And James says, I want you to understand that God doesn't do that. God does not look down and go, let me put some evil in your life. Let's take some personal responsibility. And that's the next part, and that's the hard part for us. Because if we take personal responsibility, then it calls for us to examine our own lives. Because notice the next part that he says. He says, no, where does temptation come from? Listen to what he says. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. Uh-oh. Where does the evil come from? Inside of us. All of a sudden it comes back, he goes, where does it come from? He goes, whatever it is you're desiring. All of a sudden that begins to take over. That's just what it's like you just can't think of anything else, that it becomes the whole focus. And the thing is that because we're all individuals, there are certain things that would tempt all of us, and then there's certain things that would tempt me that would never tempt you. There's things that would tempt you that would never tempt me. He says that we all have those things, and here's the battle, because if we recognize it, we recognize what's happening to us. But what ends up happening is that once that temptation is there in front of us, we have a choice. He says all of a sudden it's this desire. If we realize where it's coming from, that it's coming from within, that we cannot blame somebody else. But that's tough, isn't it? Because let's be honest, isn't it more fun to blame somebody else for your problems? I mean, if we do this, and I talk about this all the time, but let's just be honest here. We're driving down the road and somebody doesn't drive to suit us. I mean, it's like we always blame them. But we never, yesterday James and I was coming back, and, this little silly little Prius decides to cut my big truck off, like, you think? You were the idiot that didn't get in the right lane to begin with. I mean, you were so smart that you drive a Prius, but you're not smart enough to get in the right lane and know where you're going. And so then I was like, James goes, they're going to come over anyway. And I went, yeah, I've already figured that out. So I slowed way down because I didn't want to buy a Prius. And so, I slowed way down, but I was thinking about, this morning on the way to church, I'm following this little car up to go get the donuts this morning. And I go, that looks like that little Prius that cut me off. And then I realized, nope, it's a Mazda, they're safe. The things that take over in us, that will just, control us, that will get a hold of us, and he says, notice what he says. He says, once it gets a hold, what's it do? When it gets a hold of us, it says, here, I'm going to drag you, right? It's not, now too many times we're led, we're just like, hey, let's go. Right? I mean, that's me too many times. And you go, about what? That's none of your business. I confess to God it's taken care of. Now, to me, and he says, but what happens to us is we get enticed by it, and then it gets a hold of us, and it starts pulling at us. And for the geeks here in the building and the nerds, it's like in Star Wars where In the first one, where they come in and they bust out a hyperdrive, drive in the Millennium Falcon, and they realize that there's debris all around them, and they said there should have been a planet here, but it's gone, and they go, well, head over to that moon, and all of a sudden they get caught in the the pull, and they've got the tractor beam on them, and they're pulling them in. That's the way sin does this, is that we see it and we get close, and it gets its tractor beam on us, and it pulls us in. And we're dragged, and then we're enticed. And then, notice what happens. He says, then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. That it just takes over our lives. All of a sudden, we're no longer being dragged. What's happening to us? We're just going. That desire has just kicked in, and nothing is going to get in our way. I've shared this before, but it's been a long time ago. And I was talking to Joe last night. We were FaceTiming and having a good visit, and he was like, he's going to be here. He's coming in the weekend of Easter, and he's going to spend the week. And he said, hey, Dad, what are we going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to take that week off after Easter, and just kind of, we're just going to hang out. It's really cool. And he goes, well, what are we going to do? And I said, well, turkey season opens that Saturday, so, man, we'll turkey hunt, And he was like, oh, man, that sounds so good. And after I hung up with him last night, I got to thinking about, he used to torment me. He was the only one that really did this to me. But we'd get up in the woods, and we could be hunting, we could be turkey hunting. No matter what we were doing, he would go, if we were hunting together, he would plant those ideas in my head about something. Like, one time we were turkey hunting, and he goes, you know what sounds really good? Like what? Chicken biscuit from Chick-fil-A? Yeah, it's 50 miles from here. And they won't be serving them by the time we get there. Shut up. And my belly would just growl. All I could think about was chicken biscuits. One time we were deer hunting together, and it was at Thanksgiving, and Deb had made this chocolate pie, and Joe loves chocolate pie. And so, oh, by the way, Beth, I told him that you would make him a chocolate pie on Wednesday, and he goes, well, we just need to go to church fellowship on Wednesday. And so, but we had this chocolate pie, and we'd get up in the woods, and he would go, piece of that chocolate pie sounds really good right now. And I would go, we just got here. Yeah, but man, I wish I had a piece of Mom's chocolate pie. Is it time to go eat pie yet? Like, oh. So one time we had been out, and me and him had got out, and we'd stayed, and we were turkey hunting, and we were going to stay 4 days. And on the third morning we got up, and we get up in the woods, and about 8:30 in the morning, we'd heard turkeys the day before, and it had just been such, the weather just wasn't good and everything, and it was a Saturday morning, and he said, peanut butter pie from the Valley Inn would be so good. And I went, let's go. So we left, and we go back to the cabin, and we pack up, load the truck up. So we got to get to Valley Inn. So we take off. Well, back in the original days of the Valley Inn, if you wanted peanut butter pie, you had to get there early, and you learned something. When you walked in the door, and they would say, how many? You'd go, peanut butter pie. You ordered your pie right away. So we get there, and we walk in, and we sit down, and the lady goes, are you boys ready? I said, yes, ma'am. We want 2 pieces of peanut butter pie. We want them to go. We want them put in the box, and we want them brought, and we want them set on the table. Then she went, oh, okay. Anything else? I said, yeah, we're going to eat lunch. We want the pie. We want the pie cut. We want the pie put in the to-go things, and we want them brought to our table. She goes, well, I'll hold them up there. No, you won't. You'll give them away. You bring them, and you put them where we can see them. She went, okay. So she did. And we ordered. Well, the restaurant just fills up. People are coming in, and there was a little lady there that just could make pies like, oh gosh, they're just so good. People come in, and so, the regulars learn that, man, if you go in there, you order whatever. If you wanted chocolate pie, you ordered it when you got there. You got your name put on it. This couple of, they're about 4 little senior ladies, come in, and one of them's on her walker, and I mean, it's like, seriously. We watch her go across the restaurant. She gets set down. They go through the whole deal. They're close. They're loud. Me and Joe are just sitting there eating, and we're just having a good time. Just cutting up, having a great time. We hear the lady go, I want a piece of peanut butter pie. Sorry, it's all gone. Really? It's only 11:30. Sorry, it's gone. They're not making any more. We close at 2 today. We won't be open again until Tuesday. No more pie. Oh, well, I'll have chocolate. Sorry, it's all gone. I'll have apple. Sorry, it's all gone. I'll have cherry. It's all gone. What do you have? Well, for some odd reason, they'd made sugar-free apricot that day. And the lady went, that's not what I want. Never mind. I just won't have pie. And so these little old ladies. And the one with the walker is mad. And she sees the waitress come out carrying pies for the smart people that had ordered early. And set the pies down. This lady that had taken 30 minutes to get across a small restaurant with a walker ran and grabbed, I'm serious, Joe saw it, ran and grabbed this waitress by the arm and shook her and said, you told us there were no more pie back there. And she said, well, they pre-ordered. And she's mad, and she goes over and she sits down, and Joe goes, how much does pie cost? I said, it's $2 a slice. He goes, you think she'd give me $5 for my slice? Yeah, it is so, Joseph. Now, I told you all that story just to see that the desire for something can just totally take over to the point that you will leave something that you truly love doing. The boy left a day early because all he could think about was peanut butter pie, how good peanut butter pie goes. And it affected me, and I'm like, let's go. Now, it turns out to be that we had such a good time that day. It was just funny watching people because I love watching people. I like interacting with people. James says to us, understand something. He's saying to the people in the first century, he's saying, you'll be dragged away and enticed. Let me tell you something. There's serious consequences if you let sin get a hold of your life, because once it's dragged you in, then it takes over. And once it conceives in your life, it gives birth to sin, and sin gives birth to death. It can kill you. It can kill relationships. It can destroy you. It can destroy your life. So it takes over. Where does it come from? It begins on the inside. God's not doing it. Now, it is true. Turn with me. Just hold your fingers there and turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, because here is one of the most misquoted verses in all of Scripture, because it's misunderstood. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13, talking about temptation, well, the way this is always applied is somebody will go through something bad, and they'll go, well, God promised me He'd never give me more than I could bear. And I'll always go, what are you being tempted with? Because this is a temptation text. Because listen to what he says. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13. He says, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. So listen to what he's saying there. He's saying, guess what? Is temptation a common occurrence? Yeah. Temptation will be a common occurrence in our lives. And he says it's that recognizing it. That you can't blame somebody else for it. He goes, guess what? You cannot say, oh, I'm being picked on. I'm being more tempted than somebody else. He goes, there are temptation that is common to everybody. Satan is always going to use a scheme, something to tempt you with, something to get a hold of you with, something to take over your life. And he says, listen, if you know it, and you know that you're being tempted, and you recognize it, and you step up and you take responsibility, it's not a sin to be tempted. The sin is to respond to it, and the danger and the way it will entangle and take over your life, that it'll totally consume you. There are story after story in the Old Testament of people being tempted by things. King David stands on the porch of the palace and sees a naked woman bathing. He doesn't He doesn't run back inside. He says, go find out who she is and bring her over here. Right? I climbed up to do some tarring around our chimney one day, and I'm standing up there on the roof and I'm scraping limbs and stuff off, and 2 houses to the east of us, they have a pool. This young couple was living there, and they're naked as a jaybird in the pool. And so I do quite a bit of work in the summertime on the roof. We always have roof issues in the summertime. But no, I'm standing up there and I'm sweeping this stuff off, and I look over and I'm like, whoa. You know, like, hey, how y'all doing? And they're like, I'm like, they're not even embarrassed. And then I'm like, got to get off the roof. You know, you're not going to believe this. And what was really funny is I'm working out in the yard one day and they drove by and they went. And then I'm like, oh my God, they're running the house. You know, I'm like, they waved at me. Oh, you know, it's like, you know, you're like, ah. You know, it's like, really? Oh, good, you know. And they've moved now. I'm like, whew, you know, the house is vacant, you know. But every time they would drive by, I was just like, you know. It embarrassed me more than it embarrassed them, you know. And so but here's King David. He's standing on the porch. He sees Bathsheba over there. He's like, hey, yeah, bring her on over here. They sin, and then he works to cover it up. He eventually kills her husband to cover it up. That's the extent we'll go to. Or we can follow what the Apostle Paul says and what James says to us. He says, guess what? You recognize it. You know that it's going on. Once you recognize that it's going on, you admit that it's going on, and you begin to ask God, and God will provide a way for you to escape. He's not going to, he goes, listen, He's going to provide a way for you to bear up under it. You know what? The promise is never, I won't give you more than you can bear. I'll give you the ability to bear up, not to do it. So when we fail, what we do is I do this, we all make excuses about what we do. Well, if they hadn't have done this, or if they hadn't, you know, I mean, it's like, right? This truck driver wouldn't let me out on the road the other day. Y'all probably think I'm the worst driver in all the world. I'm actually an old slow granny. I mean, I drive Debbie crazy. She's like, would you speed up and go?
It's not your fault.
It is my fault. Now, I'm trying to merge out on the road, and it was so funny because Jacob was with me. We'd been to see Chuck at the hospital. And Jacob's with me, and Jacob goes, well, as soon as I turned on the thing, he goes, I'm going to act like Mom. Speed up, speed up, speed up, speed up. So I'm just shooting. I was like, oh, you want to speed up? Oh, I'm just shooting down there, and I get up there, and here's this tractor trailer, and he refuses. This guy is not going to let me out. And so I finally get over, and so I'm behind him, and I'm like, I can't let this go. I've been challenged. And I had to tell him he was number one. Some of you'll be to 3 o'clock this afternoon, you'll go, he told that truck driver he was number one. I wonder what he meant. You will figure it out. All right? And then I miss the next turn that I need to make, and I'm looking at Jacob going, well, that was foolish, wasn't it? And Jacob goes, yeah, it was, Dad, but you're quite entertaining. And I go, man, I got to repent. I go,
I had to preach on temptation this week. All this is going on. You know, but I'll stand here and admit when I act like a fool, I acted like a fool. You know, the thing is that truck driver needs is like, here we are in life. We're going to be tempted. Sometimes we're going to fail. I'm going to have to say to my 16-year-old, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I ever act that way. I'm sorry I did that. And he goes, I understand. But, he goes, that was aggravating. And I go, but it was kind of good. I still got on the highway. And he goes, yeah, I know. And I was like, but I thought that challenge. And I think sometimes what happens is that most of the time we can relate to that. We feel the challenge. We go, okay, well, I want to be a part of this or whatever is going on. do it, don't do it. And we don't look for the way to escape. We don't look for the strength to bear up under it. We don't look for the, if something is tempting you, if you know something tempts you, don't do it. I have preachers that I'm saying, preacher friends, preachers that I know, maybe know me, they saw me, and vice versa, that are invited to speak other places and they will never travel alone because they take an accountability person with them. I'm like, that's incredible. If you're tempted at something, don't put yourself in that position. Stay away from it. Stay out of it. And so he says, why? Because go back to James now. That's what he says. Because we can graduate many times to bring about sin and destroy our life. He says, because, verse 17, he says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly light, who does not change like the shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth that we might be the first fruits of all that he has created. He says, you're special to God. You're his first fruits. You're who he is. He says, God gives good things. God wants to have good things in your life. And let's face it, when I fail to temptation, just like, last Tuesday, driving home going, I can just let this go, or I can face, I can let the guy know that I'm not happy with him. Which way is he going to go? I spend the rest of the time, because I had to turn around to go back to a stop that Jake and I needed to make, going, I regret acting that way. It was sinful, it was wrong. I'm setting the wrong example for you at 16. It's not right. Or I could have just stayed behind the guy, went to my next exit, taken it, gone up, and done my thing, and had no regrets. He's saying you can have the good or you can have the bad, which you're going to take. I'm afraid what happens to us is that we want the bad, but we still want God's good. And God says you can't have no good. Understand the practical nature of Scripture is, he says, look, guess what? It can control us, and we can be controlled by it. Because let me tell you what happens to us. When we are tempted and we sin, we will spend so much time living in fear of being exposed. Because we think it's a secret, but somebody knows. And so we will do everything possible to avoid being caught. Like King David did, rather than facing it. And so one of the things that James will bring up in this book is confess your sins one to another. One of the things that I always share over and over again is that if you have been tempted and you have failed, just confess it. Get it out. Share it. Because it is so much better if you do it than if somebody else does it for you. Because that always wins. And so he says to me, if you act like a fool with me, rather than being confronted with somebody saying, I saw you that like a fool. So we get it out. But the best part is understanding where temptation comes from. And when I understand where it comes from, then I can control it. Because I don't let it get a foothold in my life. Let's pray. Father, thank you for everything you give us. We thank you for Jesus, our Savior. We thank you for watching over us. We thank you for meeting everything that we have. Lord, today, help us. We live in a world that's so tempting, just as the people that James wrote to, they were so tempted that here we are, Lord, in a culture filled with temptation. So we need your help, we need your strength. Lord, we're thankful that we know where it comes from. We know that we get to You're not going to look down here and change your mind about us. Thank you. Thank you for loving us so much that you gave us Jesus. Through him we pray.